Welcome back to Mayo Clinic Radio. I'm Ian Roth.
And I'm Tracy McCrae.
Julianne Vasichek has always been a competitor. A 7-time state champion in high school, she went on to star on the University of Minnesota Duluth women's ice hockey team, helping lead them to 2 national championships, becoming an All-American, and making the U.S. women's national team. But after all those battles on the ice, the biggest battle of her life was still ahead.
In 2008, Julianne was diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis. PSC causes damage to the bile ducts, which eventually quit working. Eventually, the disease results in the need for a liver transplant. And here to share her story and to let me know if I pronounce that correctly is Julianne Vasichek. Welcome to the program, Julianne.
The rare disease that is alphabet soup.
Did I get that right?
You
Primary
did.
sclerosing cholangitis.
You did.
All right. Well, you're from Montana. How did you get to Minnesota? Just through hockey?
Yep. I was recruited to play Division I hockey at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and that's how I made it over here.
And are you in Minnesota or are you in Montana now?
I am in Minnesota. My family is in Montana, so I get to go back and visit them, but I've just fallen in love with Duluth. I've tried to move away a couple times, and it's, I think, the draw of the lake and community.
So you were obviously a major athlete. You played hockey for many years. Did you have any health concerns while you were an athlete, while you were playing?
You know, it didn't really start until I was the summer actually before I was coming to college. I was 18 and I started to have some digestive issues. And so at the end of that year of school, actually a week before the national championship, my team was on the ice practicing and I was in for my first colonoscopy. And it, felt so huge at that time to be, 18 and diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And I had just had symptoms all season and it was very difficult to deal with. So, one moment I remember from the semifinal game, I was just totally drained from, all of the issues with it. And the coach came down and said, look, you're doing phenomenal. I just need one more shift out of you. And it's just a great kind of metaphor for how Shannon and I have become friends over time.
So when did you get diagnosed with PSC?
So PSC diagnosis came in 2008. But I think that...
But how much longer was that?
So it was 2001 to 2008. So 7 years.
Okay.
Yep.
And how did you wind up at Mayo Clinic? Just because of the proximity?
Well, I was actually out in Maine at the time coaching at Bowdoin College. And, when I considered... my thoughts and I had an opportunity to come back and work at UMD. I thought it was important. My parents had treatment down here at Mayo Clinic. So I knew it was the best and I thought that I should probably consult and reach out and head back to Minnesota.
Explain a little bit about what PSC is.
Well, it is a crappy disease. I probably shouldn't say it on the radio, but it's...
It's fine.
Yeah. Well, it's a disease that affects the bile ducts. So your bile ducts are like a tree inside your liver. And those bile ducts get scarred. Your body is sort of attacking itself. So it's autoimmune in nature, but it's not quite autoimmune. And so you sort of go through these roller coasters. It's a little bit like hockey shifts where you peak and then you come down, you get a period to rest. And so those bile ducts get scarred up and you come in for therapy, so to speak. You might have a procedure like a scope going down your throat to open those ducts up. But that's only usually a temporary thing. You'll have some stents placed and then that might buy you some time until the next progression. So over time, that period might decrease or, there's a possibility of having infections and things like that. So, various hospital visits. And then it's just the symptoms. I mean, it's fatigue that you live with every day. It's an invisible illness, essentially. Terrible, terrible itching that doesn't express itself on the skin except in the form of you sort of cutting yourself. It's maddening. So it's a disease that's very mentally demanding as well as physically.
Is that a day-to-day thing? I mean, what's day-to-day life like with this?
Day-to-day life is waking up and, really feeling like you're starting behind behind everybody else. There's that thing out there called the spoon theory. And it's, assessing, how many spoons you have on that day. And so, it might just take 1 or 2 spoons for me to actually get dressed and get breakfast and get out the door. And, I know there were some days at work where I would go to work and I'm fine, I'm working, but around 11 o'clock, it's like, oh, my brain would, click in. It'd be like, okay, I'm here now. The fatigue is worn off a bit. And, the itching, you might be hiding it under the desk or, wearing long sleeves, it just changes so much, and with the dry weather,
Right.
or humidity, it just affects it. So
I can see from your T-shirt, you've got your PSC partners seeking a cure. So you must be working with other people who have PSC. Is that kind of common? Are most people's symptoms similar to what you experienced, or is it all over the board?
Well, it's an individual disease. There's different branches of PSC they're finding out. And so PSC Partners Seeking a Cure is a nonprofit out of Colorado, and they were formed, about 13, 14 years ago now. And I first went to the conference in 2009. So they have an annual conference, and this year's is coming up at Mayo Clinic in June. And when I went there, it's like you go there and you have a family. This rare disease only affects about 30,000 people in the U.S., about 100,000 worldwide. So I think I saw a statistic like 7 in a million will be diagnosed with it. So it is, most PSCers never meet another person with the disease. And so every year we get a chance to come together, have this family, and we're the cool kids. And, you're not crazy. And it's, the caregivers come together too, and it's an enormous amount of stress on them. So that's something I always support, and it's a mainly volunteer-run organization. And essentially they taught me, how to disease and how I could be an advocate. And so they're really pushing the forefront along with places like Mayo Clinic.
You mentioned that this is a very individualized disease. You ended up having a transplant. Talk to us about what led up to that and how that experience was for you.
Yeah, well, most people, not most people, I should say, but people at the end of their PSC course may or may not need a liver transplant. And, that's trading one disease for another. It's not a cure. And so PSC can come back after the transplant, which is kind of a bummer. But, I knew that I would very likely eventually need a liver transplant because I'm so young. But I wasn't to that place where I needed to be listed yet, and we weren't talking about it yet. Dr. John Poderuka was my doctor at the time. And so, actually my labs looked really good in 2015, around January, February. And so, we set out, come back in 6 months. Well, I happened to, at my job, I was working at UMD and happened to be having an organ donation PSC awareness night with the school. And this was actually February 20th, of 2015. And I had had a fever the week before, wasn't feeling well. So I kind of knew that I was probably going to need to go in. And I did. And I thought, I went in on Sunday and thought, I'm probably just having a cholangitis attack. It sounds so blasé, but you get used to that.
Right.
And I did go in, and I have a few memories from Monday and Tuesday. But the next thing that I really remember, basically from the 23rd to March 5th, is myself waking up. And I woke up, and one of my former teammates and best friends, Megan Stotts, poked around the curtain, and she said, "You're awake." And I said, "Well, here I am. I'm kind of literally me. I was just realizing this." And she said, we're talking, and I said, what's going on? And she said, "You don't know what happened?" And I said, "No." She said, "You had a liver transplant."
Oh my gosh.
And of course I just, what?
You didn't even have time to get nerves or anxiety about the procedure.
No, like I said, I was not listed. And so what had happened is we would find in hindsight on that Thursday. So I went into the hospital late Sunday, early Monday, and just started to gain fluid, and my body was starting to shut down. And what was happening is I had a second rare disease come in the presence of the PSC called Budd-Chiari syndrome, and that blocked, that clotted the liver, or the veins of my liver. And so it's hard to tell when that clot came, but the one risk of that is that it can come and cause fulminant liver failure. That's exactly what happened. And so they were, up at St. Luke's in Duluth, they were keeping me afloat, but around Tuesday night, everything really crashed.
Got you down here, and you got a transplant.
Yeah, got me down here, was able to come by Mayo Medical Transport, and, my wonderful nurse that I've met kept me going. And early Thursday morning, I was listed, and incredibly, the liver became available Friday, and I was at the top of the list. There was about 7,000 people on the list in the nation.
And 4 years later now, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling the best I have actually since college. Wow. Because of the disease, because of PSC and having lived with that, and because I probably had it for a number of years before I was diagnosed. So it's a different feeling, obviously. physically in college, I was about 35 pounds heavier and a lot of muscle and playing hockey competitively. But now as I was doing the other day on the treadmill here at Mayo Clinic, Dr. Stewart let me come up on the treadmill and skate. And it's like coming full circle and physically going from, barely being able to walk and move after the transplant to kind of honing into something that I've been doing almost as long as I was walking was quite an incredible experience.
That's fabulous. Well, April is Donate Life Month. So obviously you're excited about, are you going to get a cake for yourself or, what do you do to celebrate organ donation?
Well, my birthday was February 9th and my transplant birthday was the 28th, which is Rare Disease Day, actually. So I've had enough cake, but...
What would you share with people about organ donation?
Well, it's, it's incredible. I have not met my donor, but I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of donor families. And, I'm here today because one person made that selfless decision. And I really honestly don't know how long I would have been able to hold out. So, it saves lives and, you have a chance to help a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So, take that step and sign up. If you've been thinking about it, do it now. You never know when, that moment is going to come, and you certainly want to have that settled before that moment so your family doesn't have to struggle with that decision.
You said there were 7,000 people on the list.
7,000 people nationally and about 600 in our region.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I think a lot of people, when you think about organ donation, it's hard to put a face with who those are who are needing. You were somebody who was a top athlete. You otherwise were in perfect health. Do you think you're a good example of who people should think of when they're talking about donating organs?
Absolutely. I think, I talked through being a LifeSource volunteer ambassador, I speak with about 3 classes 3 times a year with the driver's ed, season up in Duluth. Mm-hmm. And I speak with the high school students, and I think it's really interesting for them to, I'm up in that area. They know the University of Minnesota Duluth. They know the Bulldogs. They know the women's hockey team has been good. And so they see that, and I think it just clicks in a little differently for them. Like, this person was this elite athlete, what you would never think, like you said. And so I think it just, and the other thing is they are mature. They have friends that are passing away in high school, because of terrible accidents and things like that. So, it's about bringing it to them maturely. And I think that absolutely, I love sharing my story, and I'll talk about it as much as I possibly can. And my big thing is, we got this water bottle when I at one point worked at the Charter House, and on that water bottle it said one person can make a difference. Mm-hmm. And that is something I absolutely believe in, because one person made a difference for me.
We have to say that the UMW women's hockey team, they're awesome.
The UMD women's hockey team.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
the UMD hockey team is awesome.
Don't get too close to Madison there.
Very close.
They are pretty good too.
That's right. We've been talking with patient Julianne Vasichek here at Mayo Clinic for her 4-year checkup after liver transplant. Thanks so much for your story.
Thank you very much for having me on.